Previously, in Uncommon, Book 1 in the Chronicles of the Common series, LUHCEAN made arrangements to acquire a new flight crew and to take the Castapaulics hunting for a new Hada homeworld. But first, they need to pick up supplies and a brand new adolescent engineer on the space station at Lana. And now, Chapter 8, LUHCEAN. "You're late," came the grumpy bark of our former engineer. Unfortunately, our delay couldn't be helped. Before arriving in Atlanta, I decided it was time to reconnect the blood bond with my brother. Kai argued and complained he wasn't ready, but finally accepted it was a necessary tactical advantage. My wrist still ached from Kai's overzealous bite, and it had taken more than a little coaxing to pull him off my vein. But I was still relieved it was done. I stepped away from the closing portal to the center of the small square room. "Patron, it's good to see you, old friend." I gave the man a tight hug. "It would be good to see you too if I weren't smothered in a tangle of hair. I thought I told you to cut that mess." He gave me a final squeeze, then pushed against my chest to escape the embrace. Unlike most Keddy, Patron was not comfortable with touch. I gripped the man's shoulder with a gentle squeeze. Golden yellow eyes met my own and glimmered in understanding. Patron stood a dozen centimeters shorter than I, but his wide muscular frame was distinctly Keddy. He wedged his signature cigar into the side of his mouth. "I've been giving your new boy some pointers on the Pollocs. He seems like a good kid, but I still say he's too young for my engines," Patron grumbled. "We couldn't find another old cranky carcass like you, Roni," Kai teased. "Old?" Patron asked in mock outrage. "I'm 10 years younger than you." "Not anymore. After a lovely 30-year sleep stasis, I am now 20 years younger than you." Kai leaned against the wall, crossing his arms over his chest, a full grin splitting his face. "Is that what it takes to maintain your pretty curls and baby soft skin?" Patron chuckled and gave a wink. "It's good to have you back, Kai. If you two are finished, I'd like to meet the kid you've been harassing," I requested. "I'd like to see how you've ruined Geminus. Did you know Luke replaced the entire bridge on the Pollocs? Everything! Even my chair is gone," Kai complained again. Patron led us through the narrow hatch of the small portal room and down the sub-level hall. "I remember that chair. It had holes in the seat, and it smelled," Ileana said, joining in on the teasing. "Hush, witch! It did not smell," Kai insisted. "That chair was perfectly molded to my finely shaped backside. Trust me, it smelled. Which reminds me, no Indrani food on the new bridge," I added. "Yes, Grandma. I expect you'll take up weaving and insist I keep my boots off the console soon enough," Kai joked. I rolled my eyes, ignoring the jab. We reached the end of the plain metal hall where Patron stopped at the last hatch next to the stairs leading to the offices and private quarters for the club's employees. I entered the familiar waiting room. Nothing had changed. The metal walls were still painted a dark red, lined with maps of the common systems and several viz displays. The same black sofas stood on opposite walls facing the center of the room, with a large viz table between them. On the far wall stood 2 familiar brown chairs, one of them occupied by a young Varuni. The boy leapt to his feet, left arm behind his back and right hanging stiffly at his side. He stood rigid with eyes straight ahead. "Engineer Eglin Udero reporting for service, sir." My parents had sent pictures of the kid, but I was still shocked to see the unusual lad. Most Varuni had dark skin tones of deep blue, teal, and even a few of muddy green. Eglin, however, almost looked Keddy. His skin was the shade of a light sandy beach with the barest hint of clear blue waters. He was tall, nearly as tall as myself, and he was beginning to fill out but still held on to the remnants of gangly adolescence. His short blonde hair was streaked with light blue filaments that acted as underwater sensors. Black pupils were ringed with bright yellow that bled into deep blue irises. 2 small gills were tucked behind his ears and extended to the edge of his jaw. Nothing in the boy's physical appearance gave hint to his Pranya half, but I could smell the electricity running beneath his skin that now held the barest movement as the blue hue began to slightly undulate over the light beige undertones of his flesh. He was nervous. "Who was your instructor in military protocol?" I asked. Based on the boy's stance and form, I suspected our old pilot to be the boy's tutor. "Commander Danica Deft, sir," the boy replied in confirmation. I nodded. I suspected our former pilot had a soft spot for the kid. She was not fond of children, especially adolescents. Danica would not willingly train the young man unless she truly liked him. Her hidden seal of approval went a long way to ease my doubts. At rest, I ordered and motioned the boy to return to his seat. "I'm First Captain Lucien Raval. This is Second Captain Kai Taizeka." I motioned to Kai, who nodded, then unceremoniously plopped onto one of the black sofas, kicking up his feet on the table. "And Chief Medical Officer Ileana Sakura." She gave a small, very civilian wave to the young man, but kept her distance. "Pleasure to meet you, Eglin." "And you, ma'am," Eglin politely replied. "Patron, have our supplies been delivered?" I asked. "Not yet. They should be here within the hour." "Good. I need to go to Agby's. The 3 of you are to stay inside Geminus, and yes, that's an order." Kai tapped his chest twice in a salute. "Yes, sir, Captain, sir," he mocked. I glared a reply. Eglin returned to his feet. "Captain Raval, requesting permission to accompany you, sir. I've never been to Atlanta. It would be nice to see more than this room, sir." I paused in contemplation. The Varuni boy at my side would draw attention, but it would be the boy who drew the attention, leaving me to observe. The short trip through the space station would be a good opportunity to see how the young man handled himself in public. "Granted. Stay by my side at all times. I trust you not to use your abilities, but don't touch anyone. They'll use it as an excuse to start a fight. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." The young man slipped his hands into the pockets of his long brown coat. "Are you armed?" "Yes, sir. 2 blades and a blaster, sir." I nodded and motioned the kid to follow. "Don't let the wicked witch profess any prophecies of doom," Kai teased. "If that's all she does, I'll be grateful," I mentally replied. I exited the meeting room and pulled Patron aside. "Is everything arranged?" 5 feeders, 2 guards, and his favorite foods are waiting. He shouldn't be a problem," Patron announced. I lifted a brow, silently pointing out his false assumption. Patron sighed. "We'll keep an eye on him and make sure he's not a problem." "Thank you." I squeezed the caddy's shoulder and turned for the stairs, dreading the upcoming dash through the club. We ascended the 2 flights of stairs to the main floor of Club Geminus. The loud drumming of Kubari music vibrated through the metal of the stairs and walls, increasing the closer we approached. I opened the hatch to the main level and stepped through with Eglin close behind. I paused to collect myself before rounding the corner to the club floor. The smells of sweat and alcohol and the soft perfumes of magic mixed with the overwhelming sense of hundreds of different species suffused in the small club. Booming music beat against my ears, and I removed my comm, retrieved a set of plugs, and stuffed them in my ears. A minor relief. I released the hood of my coat and pulled it over my head. Cracking my neck from side to side, I reluctantly stepped around the corner to meet the blinding lights ricocheting off the bright red walls, scantily clad bodies, and sparkling bottles of intoxicants lining the bar. "Quickly, stay close," I ordered the young engineer. The kid nodded, eyes wide and mouth slightly ajar. We made a mad dash through the thick wall of bodies. Every breath drew a new collection of scents. Kedi, ambrosia, lust, and sweat turned into fey, sorrow, and wine, which transformed into Naraki, anger, and wood beer. I sprinted past a young Raka couple who were tangled together so tightly you couldn't make out whose limbs were where. I finally pushed through the front entrance, relieved to have escaped unnoticed. Eglin stumbled through the double wide-open hatch and quickly trotted to catch up. "Stay ahead and to the left of me. I want you close and within line of sight," I ordered, then pulled at the hood to better shield my face. "Yes, sir." The young man complied and led the way through the terminal. The station of Atlanta held 14 circular terminals originally designed to be rooms for rent and lavish hotels for travelers of the common. 13 were assigned to each of the common species, including the Vatas, Mary, and Prithvi. The last central terminal was designated for various bars and clubs to cater to all species. Each terminal connected perpendicularly to a long spine of neutral space station featuring restaurants, shops, and transport tubes traveling up and down the main thoroughfare known as the Gauntlet. Bisecting the Gauntlet was another long tube of space station that included a refueling station at one end and the common High Council chambers at the opposite end. The entire space station was a massive complex featuring thousands of permanent residents. It was also the central port for the whole of the Common. Everyone from freighter pilots to assassins to the posh elite eventually made their way to Atlanta for information, goods, or simply refueling. Club Geminis was located at the far end of the central terminal. The loudest and most popular destination in Atlanta, Geminis was positioned as the finale to the various species-neutral clubs and bars in the terminal. The constant supply of traffic made Geminis one of our most profitable assets. I despised the club since the day Kai and I bought it 2 centuries ago. "Sir, may I ask why a sensitive Keddy would own such an establishment?" Eglin asked. "Currency. Geminis delivers nearly 30% of our funds for the Hada camps." "I see," he replied. "Do they know what they're funding?" "Yes, most do. They don't care as long as we give them a good time. People rarely concern themselves beyond their own wants and needs." Settling into a comfortable silence, we made our way through the central terminal. Before long, we reached the crowded gravity tunnel that transitioned visitors from the horizontal terminal to the vertical gauntlet, or vice versa, depending on your perspective. The young man ducked in front of me and led us along the edge of the tunnel, easily clearing passers-by without a brush of shoulder. His sure-footed landing as we transitioned gravity was that of a traveler well beyond his years. I had to admit that, so far, the kid was acceptable. I was impressed with the young man's attempt at a low profile. The boy was obviously taking in the nuances of the various clubs, food vendors, and small stalls, featuring colorful goods from across the Common. But he never turned his head to gawk, and he never slowed his stride. Eglin kept his hands in his pockets and deftly avoided physical contact with the crowds. Despite his unique features, or more likely because of them, the young Varuni Hada drew eyes from every corner. Many paused mid-stride to stare. Others gave us a wide berth, twisting their faces in disgust. Children stopped to point, mouths gaping in shock. Either Eglin didn't notice the onlookers, or he had grown accustomed to hiding his responses. I'd bet on the latter. I didn't envy the young engineer's heritage. The Varuni species were generally kind and congenial. They were a society that valued harmony above all else. While not as strictly isolationist as the Vatas, they seldom ventured into the Common, and visitors were restricted to only approved locations on their homeworld. As an amphibious species, the Varuni skin tones, multicolored eyes, gills, and webbed digits were unique in the Common and often caused spectacle wherever they went. But it was their ability known as Moana that drew ire and mistrust throughout the sector. With a simple touch and spoken word, a Varuni could convince an individual to say, believe, or do anything the Varuni desired. The most powerful of them did not even require physical contact to wield the ability. Eglin's hidden Pranya half was considerably worse. The Pranya were energy beings without physical form. They were known to possess other species, leaving the original consciousness silently trapped inside their bodies, watching the Pranya assume their lives. Through the millennia, they eventually developed skills to create machines and clone bodies to house their energy, but many continued in the old ways of possession. The Pranya were shunned throughout the Common, even by the hated Naraki demons. I wasn't entirely certain how Eglin had come to his Pranya half, but in all likelihood his Varuni parent was not a willing participant. The Common was not known for an abundance of kindness. I came to a stop in front of an old-world storefront in the Matrico terminal. The worn wood-framed bay window with glass panes and shingled roof drew the eye. Egby's shop was a lump of coal among the sleeker storefronts that glittered like diamonds in comparison. The window's central pane was painted with an elaborate gold eclipse, formed by 7 capital A's from the Prithya Common alphabet, and featured an illustration of extravagantly lashed eyes with, of course, one of them coyly winking. An old wood sign hung above the window reading Ancient Agby's Antique Apothecary and Astral Artifacts. "Is that real glass? How does she keep it from breaking?" Eglin asked. "Magic. Agby is different. Try not to stare, and whatever you do, please don't encourage her antics. I want this transaction to be as quick as possible." "Yes, sir." Just as I was about to enter the shop, a tall woman dressed in black assassin leathers shoved through the door, exiting the apothecary. As the siren spun to make her way down the concourse, her long black tail of hair swung to hit me in the chest. Had I been a head shorter, she would have whipped me in the face. I ground my teeth at the annoyance and took a breath for patience, watching the rude woman disappear into the crowd. I pushed through the weathered wooden door and winced. A cackling laugh echoed through the shop where a soft bell would normally alert the arrival of a new patron. Pulling the hood from my head, I moved deeper into the store. It appeared that my patients might not be up to this task today. Unfortunately, the visit couldn't be helped. My large frame made it difficult to pass between the numerous tables and displays, overflowing with powders, liquids, various animal skeletons, and partially decayed carcasses. The walls were lined with books, clocks, strange glowing stones, and all manner of devices. Flowers and herbs hung from the ceiling in bunches of every color, their perfume mingling with the scent of rot and mildew. As always, the shop was an olfactory attack against my catty nose. I approached the counter at the far end of the shop, only to pause at a familiar creaking old voice. "Son number 2, come, give an ancient woman a hug." Rolling my eyes, I turned to face the strange old woman. "Hello, Agby." The witch slowly waddled from the back room, her walking stick thumping across the wood floorboards as she approached. The ancient witch was a walking contradiction. Agby's hunched posture, rasping voice, and supporting cane were completely at odds with the rest of her appearance. Her delicate, curvy frame of unblemished porcelain skin gave the illusion of perpetual youth. Her shoulder-length black hair and straight bangs framed a delicate oval face with large silver eyes, a perky nose, and full red lips. The beautiful crone wore a tight white blouse struggling to contain her breasts, which were on display between two puffy short sleeves. A ruffled red skirt barely reached the top of her long, shapely legs, hugged by knee-high white stockings ending in little black round-toed shoes with tiny red bows on the top. Agby was an ancient woman in the body of a sex goddess dressed like a child's doll. Or a prostitute. I could never quite decide which. "You doing business with assassins now, old woman?" I curiously asked. "If I discriminated, you would still be shifting when the moon offended you," she said, snickering at the jibe. Despite the rampant stereotype that Ketty were so tied to nature that we shifted with the tides and the phases of the moon, the myth was not fact. Ketty did prefer to live in harmony with nature, but we were not compelled to shift with the sun, the moon, or any other natural occurrence. "Where's my hug?" She struck my arm with her walking stick. I bent down to embrace the woman. As I pulled away, she gave me a hard kiss on the mouth and smacked me on the cheek. "Good boy." "I'm in a bit of a hurry.
I've had your herbs ready for days," she interrupted. "Now introduce me to son number 3. It's about time you got here, young man."
"Agby, this is Eglin, our new engineer," I said. "Eglin, this is the witch Agby." Pain shot through my skull as she cracked me over the head with her cane again.
"You know they don't like that term. Why do you insist on using it?"
She turned to the young Varuni and held out her arms.
"Come here, boy. Give Mother Agby a hug."
Eglin's wide eyes darted to mine for guidance. I gave him a slight nod. I knew from painful experience that it was best to always play along with the witch. The boy bent down to hug the old woman. "It's a pleasure to meet." Before he could finish his sentence, she planted a kiss on his mouth and then smacked her palm across his cheek.
"Don't worry about that little girl problem, son. There's a lovely young woman. Well, she's not quite a woman yet, but neither are you quite yet a man. In any case, she's in your future. And when you two mate, oh my, the sparks will fly, literally."
The witch cackled and coughed. Eglin ducked his head. The lad's blush finally masked the old woman's handprint still marring the side of his face. I gave her a gentle pat on the back as she continued to sputter and cough.
She waved a hand of dismissal and pulled a small bottle of ambrosia from between her ample breasts, then popped the cork and drained the drink. Woo! She threw her hands in the air, shook her head, and smacked her lips. Egby corked the bottle, which was once again full, and slipped it back between her breasts. Although you do require a little time to toughen up first, or that little girl will eat you alive. The witch managed to sway her shapely hips while taking a wobbly step back and surveyed Eglin head to toe. With a whip of her wrist, a folded piece of parchment appeared between her fingers. Your lesson plan, my boy. Consider it a little leg up in the love department. She gave him a wink and placed a hand to the side of her mouth and conspiratorially whispered to him, Let's face it, sweetie, you need this. Before I could scold the witch, the young engineer snatched up the paper and quickly slipped his gift into a pocket. Crazy meddling old hag. I doubled over, the walking stick suddenly shoved into my gut. I didn't raise you to be rude. Ancient is undeniable, but old? Have some manners, son. I coughed from the unexpected injury. You didn't raise me at all. She rolled her eyes and flicked her fingers. That's subjective. I rose to my full height, towering over the petite woman in the hopes she would retreat to her position behind the counter. Kai and I had been acquainted with Egby for 3 centuries now. The Kedi and Raqqa military forces had been bristling with tension to start another war, as they did every several centuries. Living in constant tension, I was having trouble controlling the beast. Egby was reported to be the only resource for a possible solution. For some unknown reason, upon first meeting the woman, she immediately assumed the role of unneeded surrogate mother. Egby, however, was the kind of mother who never calls, writes, or does any actual motherly actions, but nevertheless insists on treating us as her sons whenever we visited. One narrow eyebrow rose over her 2 large eyes. Speaking of a leg up, that mate of yours will definitely need one to climb your mountain. Are you still growing? I can never tell with your kind. The young engineer muffled a laugh behind a cough. I took a deep breath and prayed for patience. Egby, we really... Bethany! She suddenly shouted, then slowly made her way behind the counter. Bring me the package for son number 2. Finally, almost out of here. Don't be so impatient. Son number 1... Or is he number 2 now? No, that's far too confusing. Anyway, he gets to deal with that for a while. Send Kai my love and give him a smack on the cheek for me, yes? Oh, I'll smack him for you, I groaned. And stay out of my head. A short, plump, blonde woman rushed from the back room, dropped a package on the counter, and hurried back from whence she came. Smart woman, I'd run too if I worked for the crazy shrew. Egby began to push the package in my direction. Before I could retrieve the paper-wrapped bundle, her hand shot out to grip my wrist. Eyes rolling into the back of her head, the old woman began to hum. No prophecies, Egby. I do not want a prophecy. I tried to pull my hand from the vice-like grip of the ancient witch, but the petite woman had latched on like a starving Naraki. Her humming slowed until pure white eyes met my own and she recited my unwanted prophecy. I quickly started to mentally recite the stars, the planets, moons, satellites, and capital cities of all the common systems, anything to avoid focusing on the blasted prophecy. A bite for a kiss, a dagger for a cure, a finger for a home, a sigil for a lure, battled blood from broken hope, uniting goals with guarded mates, borrowed love by stolen flesh, igniting trust betwixt uncommon fates. Passions blinded and buried, chase the chaste, family, friend, and foe test untrue, betrayed by lies, betrayed by faith, loyalties bond and break the destined crew. A mother of exiles shall give birth to a house, a brother of flames will folly by festering fears, a sister of life shall light twin souls, a father of night will rain untamed tears. Your future is charted in the stars, my son. Claim your soul and save the common. Egby quickly released my wrist and continued to push the parcel in my direction as if nothing had happened. Her eyes slowly returned to their normal sparkling silver. Mix this at half your previous strength, free of charge for one of the saviors of the common. I almost forgot. She pulled a book from beneath the counter and handed it to me. Give this to your new girl. She's going to need it." I took the small blue book titled Egby's Handy Handbook for the Uncommon.
"What's this?"
"Just a little something you're going to need," she cryptically replied. "Well done in the White Room, by the way, although I did lose a large sum on that bet. I was certain you were going to just snooze and ignore the poor woman. I'm glad you proved me wrong." She smiled and issued her trademark wink.
The White Room? The dream?
My entire world stopped at the realization that the crazy crone was indeed referring to my dream, and the woman whose scent was branded in memory. I blinked away the dizziness lack of breathing had caused and narrowed my eyes at the old woman. Could the dream have been real? Could Egby have known about it in advance enough to at least bet on the outcome? And whom was she betting with? "What do you know of the White Room?" I growled, restraining myself from jumping across the counter to throttle the old woman. "Oh, everything," she said, scrunching her nose as if the answer was obvious and waving a dismissive hand. "Although, right now I suspect you might be more interested to know son number 1 just teleported to the Vatas terminal. One of my people might have given him some misleading information. No need to thank me." She smiled brightly. After a moment's shock, my anger kicked into full throttle. "What did you do, old woman?" I growled, rage pressing against my bones and demanding I shift. Egby merely smiled and snapped her fingers. Suddenly Eglin was no longer standing next to me. "Keep that pretty animal leashed, my boy. Son number 3 is safely back in Geminis," she smiled. "Now it's time for you to join your brother." With a snap of her fingers, everything disappeared. Subscribe to continue listening and discover what happens when Lucian suddenly finds himself in the demon terminal on the space station at Lana. If you liked what you heard, the Uncommon ebook can be purchased at all major retailers for only 99 cents. Thank you for listening.